Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich, and this is our weekly roundup of some of the stories that have been making headlines here in northern Michigan as we talk with the journalists that have been covering those stories. And at the table with me this week from Interlochen Public Radio News Director Peter Payette. Peter, thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Bill.
Good to see you. Spring is finally here.
It is. It is. Last weekend was quite nice.
Yes.
We earned that one.
That's an understatement. Yes, it feels that way for sure. Well, let's talk about some of the stories that IPR has been covering recently. And TCAPS, the school district, obviously continues to be in the news. Hardly a week goes by that TCAPS isn't in the news for something, of course, as one of our area's biggest employers and obviously the largest school district. But we're looking at this issue of whether or not to close some of our elementary schools and the notion of a private donor stepping forward to save one of them.
Right. And yeah, that was of interest to us. In fact, there were a couple of ideas out on Old Mission to help that particular neighborhood, so to speak. The first, which I think maybe has been set aside, at least for now, was to have a local millage in the township. So Peninsula Township residents could be asked if they would pay higher taxes to the township, and the township could then write a check to the school and essentially subsidize the elementary school that is losing money. And TCAPS thinks they can save about $400,000 a year by closing it. So that was, I thought, an interesting idea that was sort of a way to get around the Proposal A in Michigan, which is a voter-approved change to the state constitution that wants schools funded equally, and they are more equal under Proposal A, but not entirely equal.
Right?
But the idea that is on the table right now is this unknown individual would give the school $800,000 and receive unspecified something in return that's not being disclosed. We can't get either side to talk about exactly what the terms of this gift would be. It's in negotiation, and that's one of the real questions is, well, what do you get for $800,000? Does the school have to remain open forever, or for 5 years, or 10 years? What's being asked? And that's something that nobody seems very eager to talk about. But we're very interested to know, and we think will need to come out sooner or later.
I was going to say at some point it's got to be made public.
We've been looking into this and done some reporting on it because it really raises questions about equity. And of course, equity is something that leaders in Traverse City have talked about for a long time. And whenever trouble with budgets comes up, almost inevitably, someone in Traverse City will talk about how some schools downstate get more money than Traverse City per student, and how that's not just, and how the state needs to fix that. But now some people are saying, well, wait, you're now about to take money to
make one school
to keep a school open that you would otherwise close. So isn't that aren't you doing the thing that you also decry?
It's and I scanned this article on your website. I don't know how many different folks you may have talked with about this, but the one mom I saw that was quoted was pretty outspoken along those lines that we can't throw all this money at the well-off or well-to-do district or well-to-do community school such as Old Mission, when Interlochen, for example, doesn't have the financial resources within its own smaller community.
Right.
That, to emphasize your point, just by way of example, do you sense that there's this overwhelming concern, or is it a few
it's hard to know.
Squeaks? Or
it's hard to know, and we did not present our report as though we could discern what the majority of people think. We just thought it was an interesting ethical dilemma for the school. It was interesting. We went, our reporter, Morgan Springer, went over to Interlochen Elementary, and I think she maybe talked with 5 parents, and I think 3 out of the 5 at Interlochen thought it was okay, that they didn't object to that on grounds of fairness or equity. They thought, hey, if those people have someone who's willing to spend a lot of money to keep that school open, more power to them. And these are people at the losing end of the deal. And so we had an Interlochen parent in our story saying, that's okay with me if they want to do that. But there were parents. I think when the news was first reported that there was this offer, and then the school board voted to hold off on Old Mission and look at this. I think on the Ticker's report, the Ticker tends to have a lot of kind of digital conversation on its webpage. This was where you first started seeing this come out, and people making comments like, "Oh, education for the highest bidder," and things sort of like that. So the idea was out there, but anyone who knows the history of TCAPs, it has to smack you right in the face, because I mean, Paul Soma in particular and many people involved at TCAPS have trumpeted this issue. They formed a nonprofit, the name of which is, let me take that back. They did not form a nonprofit, but they formed a kind of a group about 10 years ago to really push this and try and coordinate pressure on the legislature with other districts in Michigan that receive just the lowest amount per student. I mean, they were leading the effort to get the legislature's attention to start to address the issue and start to lift up those lowest funded schools at a rate that would kind of bring them up to parity with the highest funded schools more quickly. And some people claimed, and it seemed to me, although it's been a while, that they had some justification that they were actually successful, that organizing and petitioning and letter writing and all the kind of stuff you do that was organized out of this group in Traverse City. Kurt Kilborn was a parent and a candidate, I think, for the school board at that time. He was involved in this. Paul Soma was involved in this. They were really pushing this issue, and actually, not long after that, the legislature took some actions to lift up the schools at the base level and try and get them moving upward more quickly than the highest funded districts. So they have kind of a proud history of holding up, being the standard bearer for equitable school funding, and championing the cause that says it shouldn't matter where you live. All education. Every kid should get a good education. Now, their argument here is, look, we're not going to give kids at Old Mission anything that kids at other places won't get. It's not as though we're going to agree. I mean, the example in the story that we have that Paul Soma gave was if this donor says, well, class sizes need to be 20, and I think average class sizes district-wide are like, I think 25, or I don't know exactly what they are now, but they're not. We're not going to do that. We're not creating a special sort of private education environment. We're just looking at the possibility that this money will allow this school to stay open and keep offering the same education to these kids that is being offered to kids, that they get now and that is given to schools around the district.
I don't know the particulars. There does seem to me, though, the potential for a very fine line. For example, if you're a graduate of TC Central and you want to donate $500 to the football team, how is that any different?
I think we do that.
But that's what I mean. My football team, my alma mater gets more money. Therefore, that school program gets more money than the school across the street.
No, it becomes a la carte. What do you want, and
what's okay and what's not.
Right, and the place where this really comes back at everybody is then when the school district says, what goes for a millage. It says, we have these needs across the district, and we need to do this, we need to do some improvements here, we need this, and here's how much money we need. And people in districts that have means can say, oh, we're all set. We've made an arrangement for our school. We don't need to vote for that. And that's the thing. I spoke with an individual off the record who made an interesting point, and this person has been involved at TCAPS, and the point was that this is a very sticky situation for the district because they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. Yep. Because if they take the money, people can say, oh, we don't need, people are looking for reasons to vote no, and it's a very small group of people that swing these votes. There's I think there's about 40% of the people that are just going to vote no. And then there's about 40% that are probably just going to vote yes. And there's kind of that 20 in the middle that decide these things. And with this, if they take the money, people can say, "Well, you don't need our help. You've got private donors. You can raise the money. We don't need more. We don't need higher taxes." But if they don't take the money, people will say, why don't you take the money? These people want to help you. We're not going to raise our taxes if you're not going to take help. So it could be. It's a tough. They're in a bind.
Yeah,
frankly,
they really are. How does a story like that make it on the air, just from the stage of discussion? It was Morgan. Morgan was the reporter for that, right?
Right.
Was that an idea of hers? Is it something that comes up in a staff meeting, or that you come up with as news director? Where does it come from?
Yeah, I think it came from. It was Morgan's idea, but I think she was kind of. I think she was a little struck by the idea that this could happen. I think a lot of people thought, sure. Really? You can keep a school open if someone will write a check? It doesn't quite fit with our idea of public education. But in fact, through the reporting, we learned that the amount of money, we found some researchers down in Indiana, I think, who have kind of analyzed this, and they see nationwide that since '95, the amount of money going into schools, private money through nonprofits or gifts or boosters or whatever the sources, that has quadrupled. And I'm not going to say the numbers because I will likely get them wrong, but it's a vastly growing method of propping up education. But right, so we just got to talking about it. I think it was these comments in the ticker that brought it to Morgan's attention, and then we kind of processed a little bit, and I've been around a while, so I sort of know the history, and I kind of filled her in on that. Michigan has a proud history of trying to equalize education. Proposal A, when it was passed by voters, Michigan was on the front page of the New York Times. That was considered groundbreaking legislation in a movement that was kind of sweeping the nation to try to address these great disparities. Yeah. And so I kind of fill in some of that background, but the trick is we need to get people to address the issue. We need people, we need someone who actually thinks that there's a problem to talk. We can't just quote, anonymous Facebook posts. So we found some people, and the parent we used as that voice we ended up in the story, and we got Paul Somas. I would talk to some board members, but they there's a fairly unified view of things. It wasn't as though there was different messages coming out of different mouths at the upper level of the TCAPS leaders. So there may be some differences of opinions among the board. Maybe they don't want to talk about those right now. But yeah, so you identify the story. Basically we identified a question. Is that ethical? Is that equitable? I think the headline on the web is that equitable? And then we just explore that, and that's how we do the story. From there. Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit and take a different direction with the conversation, but parallel in a way with one of the TCAP school board members, also making news for making a decision to run for higher office. Megan Crandall.
Megan Crandall. But she's run before.
Yes.
She ran as an independent in 12? I think it was 2012, not 14. I could be wrong on that. I don't believe it was the last election.
It all blurs together, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah, she's running for State House now.
She is. She told us she's actually a Milliken Republican, but there's no real space for somebody with her views and ideas in the Republican Party, so she's running as a Democrat, seeking the Democratic nomination. Yeah, I don't know. Running as an independent was probably a long shot, just by nature. Mm-hmm. Megan Crandall, we'll see what kind of campaign she can run. She did, the way she got onto the school board was pretty impressive. That was a year, there was a lot of turmoil. I think it was '07. There was a lot of turmoil at TCAPS then over school closings that I think had been announced sometime before the election came up. There were 9 people running that year, and and some were running quite hard. So it was really a contested field, and she and I think Margie Rich were the 2 that were elected. Just by a little bit. And so I don't know exactly. It's hard to know how those work. Right. I don't know how you run a campaign like that. It's impossible really to analyze that. But she did something right. And last time we saw Betsy Kafia come, pretty close. She had 47% of the vote, I think. So a Democrat can make a run at the 104th, which is Grand Traverse County, basically.
But now Megan Crandall and
Betsy
Betsy
now
Kafia
Megan and
go up
Betsy
against each other
will go up against each other
in the primary.
That'll be interesting. I mean, Betsy's really laid a lot of groundwork. I think she has a group of people who are behind her message, the kind of anti, opposed to PACs, opposed to kind of moneyed power. It seems like one that's resonating. Bernie Sanders did extremely well in Traverse City, in Grand Traverse County. I want to say Sanders beat Clinton 2-1 in the primary in Grand Traverse County, and was very strong across the first congressional. So that message of, kind of real people and being a representative for people and not for people with money and power seems to be a good one. So maybe Betsy will have more luck this time, but she's got to get through the primary.
We've also got as you said, the first congressional race to watch out for. We have a new contender. That's the
one we're most interested in. I mean, I think most of the political races are hard to cover for us. I mean, you can do forums, but they can be a challenge. It's the events are not the most exciting, and they can just be kind of dull affairs, frankly, sometimes. But the first congressional is shaping up to be quite a race. There's some pretty interesting primaries. The Republican primary, I think, will be the closest one, and there's two candidates who have raised good chunks of money: Jason Allen, Tom Casperson, political heavyweights in Michigan. Both have been, and Casperson is a state senator.
But they've got a newcomer in the
field.
And
then now there's this kind of outsider, Jack Bergman, with a military background, very kind of just forceful that he's got a different approach and he can change things, and maybe he can sort of occupy that outsider space that
Right.
Trump and Cruz and Sanders are appealing to. It doesn't. There's no indication that Bergman's going to raise the kind of money that it takes. No indication yet. But last I knew, he had not filed on Friday his fundraising for the first quarter. So I don't know those numbers. So I could be uninformed in my commentary. But we haven't seen big fundraising, and that was one of the things in the report we did about Bergman's entrance into the race. Was it's something somebody said about the challenge in running across this district, because you need. He said there's almost 4 TV markets. If you really want to get the attention of everybody, it seems like TV is the way that most of the money is spent on TV ads. And he said you got to be in the Traverse City market, Marquette, Green Bay, and even Duluth for that far west end of the UP. That takes some bucks. I mean, that is not. It is a tall order, and that's. What you see, Lon Johnson clearly understands that on the Democratic side. He's raised almost $1 million and is really gearing up for the fight in the fall.
And he's up against Jerry Cannon.
He is up against Jerry Cannon, and Jerry Cannon has not raised much money. He's just raised just a fraction. He does not. He doesn't seem if you need money, he doesn't see that, or I'm not sure what his thinking is about that. But the dollars do not seem to be coming his way.
Well, Peter, let's take a quick time out. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about IPR and the structure within Interlochen Public Radio. We'll be right back on the Briefing Room.
So I do not suffer from writer's block. Just keep repeating it. It will happen.
She never wants to have a big party. She wants to have a party for one, which is when she takes off her bra, gets her library book, pours some Inglenook over ice.
It really is like inviting people into your home. I mean, Fanny and Louis lived with my husband and me for 5 years.
Go out there and buy some books.
Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm Bill Froehlich, and at the table with me this week, Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Peter, thanks again for coming by.
Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the structure and the format of Interlochen Public Radio, and maybe we can take a few minutes to explain to the viewers just how IPR works, and explain to people who aren't familiar with the inner workings that Diane Rehm does not have a cot in the cabins there at Interlochen.
Right. I hope nobody thinks that.
You're national programming and syndicated programming as well as local. Yeah. So how do those lines come together every day?
Well, we're largely syndicated programming. I mean, that's mainly what we are. And then at the local level, we kind of weave stories into that mix as we are able to produce them. Producing a public radio story, the most valuable work we do, the sort of longer feature stories, a story that's 5 or 6 minutes, those can take days just to produce one. So we're not able to do like a daily show, such as TV stations do. Mm-hmm. We did for a while, we had a call-in called Points North on Friday, and that's a little more manageable to do once a week for an hour because it's a conversation, and so you can stretch it out. But public radio is a pretty information dense, highly produced product, and a lot of time and energy goes into even stuff you hear that's like talk. So, for instance, the Diane Rehm show that you mentioned. If you listen at the end of that show, you'll hear the credits. It sounds like Diane just gets some guests in there and they just talk. But if you listen to the credits, she has 6 or 8 producers working with her. So everything is very highly researched, and every minute counts. So it's largely it's largely syndicated programming. We do some newscasting, daily news, but our real focus is on feature production and kind of narrative storytelling, where we take an issue and really kind of try and explain something. There was once an advertisement for NPR that it showed a globe as a bunch of puzzle pieces, and it said, "We not only break the news, we put it back together." Which I thought was a nice way of putting it. It's kind of that explanatory role. I think what we at IPR are good at, and what we strive to do, is explanatory journalism that really breaks things down and explains them. So most of the programming is syndicated. It comes from NPR. There's a couple other syndicators like American Public Media. And then, there's on the news team, there's 4 of us, and then we have an arts and culture reporter who does some things on our classical side, helps produce a show called The Green Room, which is a weekly conversation about arts. As we produce things, we just kind of stir them into that mix of national and international news. We have reporters in Lansing that are shared by all the stations in Michigan. But basically, we're a member of NPR, and we control our airwaves, but we run a lot of NPR programming on it.
Does NPR give you X number of minutes to fill in the morning? Do you have a 2-minute local news break?
Yeah, there's there's sort of these places that, where there's music beds, and it's sort of set up for the stations. Frankly, it's set up for larger stations who can put more in, and so there's a lot of optional places to duck out and then do local news. That bigger stations in bigger cities are filling more of those than we can.
Gotcha. What about you mentioned the classical end of that too? How are those two connected?
Well, they're separate services. They do a little news. They take some newscasts over on the classical side, but that is really a pretty traditional classical music service that plays almost entirely classical music. There's some jazz and some other things here and there on it. But it's, we're a part of the same operation. It's just 2 services. The way WTCM has a news talk service and they have a country music station. Right. It's part of the same enterprise, and there's probably a little sharing that goes on, but they're distinct services with distinct audiences. A lot of our listeners listen to both.
What about the the average day in the newsroom there at IPR? You said there's four of you there. Is somebody
Right.
always doing the news every morning? Is somebody always working on those rotating stories? How does that?
Yeah, I mean, you need hosts, right? So David Castleman's on the air every morning, and so when you have a feature, there's someone to put it in,
Introduce it.
someone to newscast. So he's there in the morning, and then Aaron Selbig generally is our host in the afternoon, and then there's some other production work. I mean, to keep a radio station going. It takes a lot more, than you'd think, or than even I would think. So it's not even as though we have a team of 4 people who are doing news all the time. I mean, really, if you add it up, it ends up being, I think if you weren't going to do any news, if you were just going to run a news service that all it did was stream syndicated programming like from NPR and just keep it running and do weather and just some local, sort of information. You need 2 people to do that.
Right.
so it's really, the total capacity for reporting is a couple people, which is good though for a small, I mean, this is a rural area. People don't, even though we tend to have amenities that are better than our population, most places with our population would have. So I'm not complaining. But so we got to run the station, and on a daily basis, I mean, mainly what we're asking ourselves is, how can we sort of what's some news for today? And we're always looking for some news for today, but we don't put a lot of stock in running out and covering things that everybody else is covering. But we do, we try and keep track of like city stuff. We've been doing some coverage of county government, but we try and keep a little flow of daily news. So that's always a question. What news can we do today? But then what are our projects that we're working on where we can really do some valuable reporting that nobody else is going to do?
Right.
That's the question we're often asking ourselves. And then sort of, we try and identify areas where we're really going to focus, like the first congressional right now. That's a constant question. How can we lead? Because that's when we really see an opportunity to. There's not a lot of media in the first congressional. There's not a lot of coverage. There's a couple newspapers, but political campaigns are kind of hard to get inside, especially in northern Michigan. So that's one we've really identified as we're gonna lead that, and so we're kind of stocking up already a lot of interviews and things we've done, and kind of building a web page where we'll keep adding to it. We're trying to organize some forums, even in the primary. Because that could be the most competitive race in the country, and a lot of money is going to get spent on TV ads and so forth, and so we think there should be some good news coverage of it, and we're going to do what we can to try and kind of fill that.
Well, one thing I've always appreciated about what you do at IPR, what the staff does there is, like you said, the ability to do some of those different stories that aren't covered everywhere else. Mm-hmm. We've talked on this program before about how you guys generally don't cover the daily crime beat,
right?
Because it's just, fill in the words for me, but lack of appeal for your broader audience is part of it too, I think.
Right. Although we've been, the one thing we've been getting more into crime with the sex trafficking issue, and we just did a piece, and we're working on some more on how. The men, frankly, in these incidents are treated, the so-called Johns, because if you kind of look at coverage and law enforcement, it's almost always the prostitutes who get arrested and charged, and the men involved, what are in law enforcement referred to as the Johns. There's very little effort, or historically there has been very little effort to go after them, which is interesting because. You say, well, here's a crime that was committed, right? We picked up one of the people involved in the crime. So now we have a witness as to who the other person was. Why? And so we started asking that question. So we did a really nice piece that I would recommend about that issue, and we're going to do more. But so we've been getting into crime more and realizing we're a little in the dark on how some of these things work, and like the crime, the daily cop meeting that
I was
people
gonna
go
say
to.
the
You know, we
breaking and enterings and the
that kind of
gas
stuff.
station robberies
We
and-
just
yeah.
can't. You know, we just we have to make a choice, right? Like we could spend all our time doing that, but we feel there are other news services on top of that, and that's not really our role. So
Yeah. And then the other element I like, which you alluded to a few minutes ago, was the longer form pieces, 4, 5, and 6 minutes. And you don't find that anywhere else in broadcast.
no, it's really become a scarce commodity, and even on on NPR. I mean, I will file for NPR from time to time, and even there, it's like 3:45 is the limit. I mean, everyone's attention spans are getting shorter, and at least that's what we think. And a lot of stations are kind of going with NPR. No, keep it short. I mean, if you listen to a show like Marketplace, I mean, there's a lot of 2.5-minute stories on Marketplace. We're kind of going the other way at Interlochen with our local reporting. Almost all the stories now come in at 5 or 6 minutes, and we're kind of letting tape go. And the experts would tell us that we're going the wrong way. That we shouldn't. People are going to get bored. I don't know. I don't know why exactly we're bucking that, but we want to tell the stories more fully. We don't want to have to cut everything tight and not let anyone say something for more than 13 seconds.
Well,
so we're kind of navigating that, I mean, ultimately people give us money to do what we do, right? That's mainly how we're funded, and so if we can justify ourselves and say, this is what we do, this is why it's different, this is why we think it's valuable, then
and people support it.
Then I mean, we have to be able to make that case, and hopefully it'll continue to work as it has.
Yeah.
It's a new century for media.
I, for one, appreciate anything longer than 3:45, so keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio has been our guest this morning. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Bill.
I'm Bill Froehlich, and thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week right here on The Briefing Room.